Welcome to the Black Paper. My name is Ndukwe Onoha.
My name is Cheta Wanzi.
How's it been, Cheta? Eventful week?
I'm not sure. It's been a quiet week, unless you want to call the little cold that I have eventful.
You know what they say? It's probably a man flu, which means you have what regular people will have, but then multiply it by 10. They say we can't live. Men can't survive a little flu.
It's not. It's not very interesting. Let's just put it like that.
Anyway, here's hoping you get better soon. So today we want to talk about something that we just can't seem to get away from. And perhaps because of the nature of this podcast, we may never get away from it. And that's the new immigration rules. When we're having a conversation about what to talk about earlier in the week, there seemed to be a few options, but then suddenly, as the news of the new rules dropped, it was almost as if our podcast was decided for us. So we're going to talk about, what has changed, how different from past governments these new rules are, the real effects, not just on the migrant community, but on jobs, healthcare, and also just look at what it means generally for politics going forward. So, Cheta, do you want to, just for those who may not know, in 2024, the UK introduced a raft of immigration reforms that fundamentally shaped the landscape for skilled workers. It was part of this government's narrative of taking back control of migration. And of course, if you remember, under the Conservatives, net migration hit almost 1 million. And this led to the rise or gave power to the rhetoric of reform and the politics of centering everything around migration, whether legal or illegal. And that sadly has seemed to shape 1 year. And it's quite interesting that, this yesterday was exactly 1 year since the Labour government came into power. But for the better part of that 1 year, the conversations around migration has championed by reform, has led the debate in politics. So what the government has done now is to raise the minimum salary threshold of skilled worker visas to £38,700, which was up from 26,000. Care workers are no longer allowed to bring dependents. Some rules previously on the shortage occupation list have been removed, and sponsor licenses are more tightly scrutinized with great reporting duties. Now, I'd like to come to this at some point because, and before Chetai reminds me, yes, I'm a labor counselor. And part of the conversations I have almost every week with some people in the community is how it seems they've been swindled by supposed employers who had given them sponsorship. And whilst we can say that, yeah, on one hand, the government is being a bit too tight with these rules, we also need to acknowledge, on the other hand, that people have made a mockery of that sponsorship regime. Anyway, Cheta, over to you. What are your general thoughts on these new rule changes?
I mean, it was coming. It's not something if anybody who wants to be honest will know that these new rule changes were going to come at some point. The atmosphere, the climate, yeah, that's a proper word. The climate around immigration, and not just in the UK, but in the West generally, has been getting more and more toxic. And it's not an accident that it's getting more and more toxic as income inequality. The GNI coefficients of various countries in the Western world is getting higher. So basically, I mean, it's the age-old thing that um, as people feel more squeezed economically, and it happens in our own part of the world. It's just that we haven't properly identified it as immigration because our countries are mishmash of various nations, but that's another discussion entirely. Basically, one thing that has always happened, and this is pretty much throughout history, when things begin to get tight for people, when people begin to feel squeezed by economic conditions around them, it becomes kind of easy for the political class, and politicians are always, excuse me, I'm sorry,
Bless you.
yeah, I have a cold. Politicians always find it easy to blame the foreigner um, for what people are going through. And this is what we are seeing. Um, so the whole thing about net migration, there's a reason why the UK um, began to ease on immigration rules. It was after Brexit. You can't avoid the Brexit part of that discussion. Migration exploded after the UK opted to leave. That's migration, non-EU migration exploded after the UK opted to leave the European Union. And the difference between, and we've talked about it a couple of episodes ago, where I gave the example of when I was working in the UK in my earlier career, and I had a colleague, French colleague, who would spend the week in London. Our office was in London. And then he would simply go to King's Cross, hop on a train, and go to Paris for the weekend, spend the weekend with his family. So he essentially, I mean, I once read about someone who lived in Barcelona and worked in London. But the UK opted to let go of all of that. The people who had freedom of movement from the EU countries, such as the Romanians, they could come and they could go, and many of them did not used to settle. They would just come and then move where go back. They would come for a season. But they and you can't it's a classic case of the law of unintended consequences. The current head of reform, Nigel Farage, spent years, decades, pretty much demonizing the EU, demonizing European immigrants. And as a result of that, the country ended up voting to leave the EU. And then, after voting to leave the EU, they found that there are a lot of jobs, especially the lower skilled jobs. And this is one of the ironies that I think is important for us to tease out. There are a lot of jobs, lower skilled jobs, that many native born Brits will not touch. So they need people to do those jobs. And those people tend to be immigrants. So you've demonized and chased away the European migrants who can come, and because they are citizens of the EU, do not need to settle, and they are white like you, then you end up with immigrants from further afield, black and brown people from Nigeria, from India, from Kenya, from Pakistan, who, because of sheer distance, cannot do the go come thing. I mean, the shortest flight from here to Lagos is 6 hours, and it's not cheap.
Yeah.
The cheapest direct flight nowadays is Air Peace, which on a very good day is about £900. It's hard to get it cheaper. How many British people can just whip out £900 every week? So so that is an unintended consequence of Brexit. The underlying factor has not gone away. Those low skill jobs, and that brings me to the irony that I talk about. So what they in terms of higher skilled jobs in the UK right now, higher paying jobs, it's an employer's market. Those jobs are not as readily available. The jobs that are very readily available are the lower skilled, going to the farm, picking up the tomatoes from the vine, or going to the Amazon warehouse and carrying the loads. Those jobs are very, very available. But because of the toxicity around the immigration debate, the people who would happily do those jobs are not coming. I read a report somewhere, I would have to search it out, that there was a visa route that the UK opened for extremely highly skilled people in research. And for a couple of years, I think it was about 5 years or so, don't quote me on that. I think it was just two people worldwide that applied for it. That tells you everything. The UK is not as attractive as many British people like to think it is. And you can see it in, for example, the NHS, where a lot of doctors are leaving the UK for places like Canada, the US, Australia. or
I know
even the
people who have
Middle
gone to
East.
Australia and Canada.
Yeah, or even the Middle East where they would get higher, where they'll get paid more. So if you are losing this many doctors, where will you get the doctors from? You will get the doctors from places like Nigeria, where your average salary for a doctor in Nigeria is about 500k naira nowadays, give or take. That's a
Which
medical
is about
consultant,
200
which
plus pounds.
which is less than 200 pounds, based
No, no,
on
no,
uh,
no. It's less than two. The rule of thumb is to always halve it, but then reduce it a bit. So it's definitely higher than 200 pounds, but not more than
the
250.
I watched the exchange. It's not up to 250. It's
No, no,
definitely
it's
not up
definitely
to
not up to
250.
250. Yes.
It fluctuates. Yeah, it fluctuates because there's a bit of exchange rate volatility. But at some point within the last 2 weeks, 500,000 naira was less than 200 pounds, at least according to Lemfi. But again, it's so yeah, ballpark is around 200 pounds. So when you're paying someone 200 pounds per month, and then he has an opportunity to suddenly change that income, increase that income by more than a factor of 10, he will come.
No,
You
definitely.
need him because your own doctors are moving.
So,
So it's an irony. It's this irony that they want lower skilled people, but they are creating conditions where it is higher skilled people that will move, and lower skilled people cannot afford to move.
yeah, but it isn't also a thing of many governments not just being honest to say the economy isn't being managed properly. Here's what I mean, because you alluded to it. We've seen this before. I remember one of the biggest for us in Nigeria. One of the biggest effects of this sort of thinking was Shagari's Ghana must go. In fact, so much so that we have a
I
bag.
think you would want to explain to
Or
people what Ghana Moscow was.
yes, so think um what's happening in the UK right now, because again, this is not new. It's an old playbook. The economy is not working. Someone does not have answers, and then they decide is the migrants. And in Nigeria, Shagari, who was the president then, who had
Well,
no.
let me take it. Let me
I
take
know,
it from
yes,
you.
he
Um,
was president,
so
Cheta, on
yeah,
yeah, officially.
just a very quick
Yeah, but
explainer. Back in the we used to have a lot of Ghanaians living in Nigeria.
yes,
At
I
at
was
a
getting to
point,
that. Yeah.
there were probably as many Ghanaians living in Nigeria as there were Ghanaians in Ghana. This was in the 60s and in the 70s, such that there's a part of Accra that is called Agege till today. Agege is in Lagos. Now, in 1979, between 1979 and 1980, Nigeria's economy collapsed. So this brings us back to the fact that demonizing immigrants is always as a result of the economy, or it's almost always as a result of the economy. So Nigeria's economy collapsed in between 1979 and 1980, and the president at the time, Shehu Shagari, who is late now, blamed Ghanaian immigrants, and then we had a situation where between 1980 and 1982, the Nigeria's population was whipped up to such a frenzy against Ghanaians that about 3 to 4 million Ghanaians living in Nigeria had to leave very, very quickly. And it's now for those who know the geography of West Africa, there are two countries, Benin and Togo, between Nigeria
Between
and
Nigeria and
Ghana.
Ghana, yeah.
The sheer number of people who had to move caused the economies of both countries to collapse as well. And of course, Ghana, which was freshly under, they had just undergone an enforced government transition. Jerry Rawlings had just come to power. Um,
Is that your smooth way of saying it? Cool.
yes, yes, the economy was hit pretty hard because they suddenly had an influx of 4 million people. So basically, it's a very, very similar pattern. Economic collapses, you blame foreigners and you chase away the foreigners, and it ends up even making the problem worse because Nigeria's economy has not recovered even till today from the collapse of
And you
79.
can see the effect of that really. I mean, it's not just that people left, but the effect of that was in the education sector. A
Yes,
lot of these Ghanaians were
were
teachers. They worked
teachers in
in
exactly.
Nigeria, and the first exit of the Ghanaian population inadvertently led to a decline, a sharp decline, steep decline in Nigeria's educational output. And it's what Cheta said before: the law of unintended consequences. But it's not just the education, but it's also the artisan and craft sectors as well were affected. So when we look at the UK now, and we're wondering why on earth are these people um behaving like this. Shout out to a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, Donna Ogunaike, who I remember we're having a conversation once around the idea of racism within the different work environments. And Donna was quick to shut this down because she said, yeah, but where we come from, we might not call it racism, but people will act badly towards you based on your ethnicity, based on your tribe. It is a human nature that's deeply ingrained, sadly. But I also just wanted to point out that while Nigeria has had at different times, whether internally or externally, conversations around migrants. So we had Shagari's Ghana Must Go. Then years down the line, we had Buhari shutting down the borders because somehow Nigeria's economy was because of porous borders and migrants bringing in their business and not being regulated. Then
I
you
mean, we
had
lived through that one recently. We lived through that
we
one
lived
very
through that one
recently.
recently, but then you now had different state governments blaming. Now, these are now Nigerian citizens from other states. In South Africa, in 2022, the Home Affairs Minister, Aaron Motsoaledi, tightened immigration rules and blamed foreign nationals for healthcare and educational challenges. Of course, South Africa is again a different conversation when it comes to blaming its fellow
Blaming
African
foreign
migrants.
nationals.
We've had this in Kenya, we have this even in Ghana, in Libya, Algeria, Tunisia. So again, the conversation, while it should be, why is this government not taking a hold of the economy, always reaches for that short branch of misdirection, of saying these guys, these so-called foreigners, are the reason why your life is bad,
But
and
if on
then
top of
whips up
that,
the population into political frenzy. And then the consequence of this is down the line, when this has become the norm, played over different governments, different eras, different guises, you then have yet another round of immigration rules that will somehow magically take control of the situation. But the question is, will it?
no, it will not. I mean, I'm sorry. It's cyclical. It's something that I do not think that will get to the extreme. And again, obeying Gordon's law, I do not think that will get to the extreme that the Nazis got to. But nevertheless, it's something that is kind of cyclical.
Oh, I'll say never. Sorry to cut you off. I'll say never. And this is not because I want to be an alarmist, but it's the little things, and they just keep being ramped up. For instance, in Trump's big beautiful bill, now he has earmarked about 150 to 170 billion dollars for deportation. Some will argue that you have concentration camps cropping up all over the place. So now, whilst
He,
I say,
he has also given some exemptions, as
mm,
it were, and there are some pretty strong lobbies, such as the agricultural lobby, that are putting pressure because
yeah.
they are beginning to see the effects.
In fact, and that lobby conversation is one I want to come back to somewhere um, at the end of well, not to, but somewhere maybe in the second half of the show. But can we go for a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll start breaking down what this means, how people should approach it, and maybe our thoughts. What do you think?
That's fine. That's fine.
Welcome back to the Black Paper. My name is Ndukwe Onoha.
And my name is Cheta Wanze.
With a cold, and I would like to recommend some hot pepper soup for you, Cheta, because as you know, That is the elixir. It solves every problem.
Yes, I know. And luckily, I have a Yoruba wife, so the
Mm,
pepper will be pepper.
the pepper will be peppery. Did, um, I want to just talk about talk about pepper, and I remember the first time I had proper amala. Oh my goodness. My nose, my ears were telling me, but it was enjoyable.
Oh, I mean, I'm a bit different now, but we Igbo people, we're not very trained on pepper. So our pepper tolerance is quite low compared to our Yoruba brethren.
Mm,
But hey, I've been married for 12 years now to a Yoruba woman, dated her earlier. So I've been trained to have a much better
lucky.
tolerance for pepper.
Lucky you. Mine was a sharp. It was like a sharp
To
pulling off of
remove
the
your
plaster.
fingernails.
I went through it and then I came back successful. Now, man, I eat. But you know what? Let's forget food for now and let's go back to the topic of. So let's say, Cheta, let's say you're a healthcare worker who on one you've had an interview, or let's just say maybe not health, but let's say skilled worker. You've had an interview. You've gone through the first stage, second stage. Let's say there are three stages. Everything looks set, and then suddenly you wake up the next day. The salary threshold to get sponsorship has been changed, and now you find the supposed employer or the proposed employer who was willing to sponsor based on an earlier salary threshold reach out to you and say, "Look, man, I'm sorry, we're not able to do this." What do you do?
There isn't much that can be done in such a situation, because at the end of the day, employers have to obey the rules set by the government. So if memory serves me, the median salary in the UK is about 37,500 pounds thereabouts.
Oh, but when you adjust for inflation, it's about 26,000 actually. So it's lower.
Okay, well, I didn't factor that in. I just quoted from the Office of National Statistics. So let's stick with 37,500 just for the ease of argument, because
All right.
what has happened is that the new salary threshold for skilled workers has gone up to 41,700. So essentially, again, it brings us back to the point that I made earlier. The jobs that so you are looking at a salary threshold that is about £4,000 higher than the median salary. So essentially, it's highly skilled people that you are looking for, or that you are making. It's highly skilled people that the system want is requesting for. But my argument is that the jobs that A, British people do not want to feel, that B, gets complained about the most, that they really need immigrants for, so at the lower end of the ladder. This, again, if I want to follow your lead and jump across the ocean very briefly, it's the same thing. The lobbies that I talked about in the US that are complaining, it's those lower jobs that they really need immigrants to fill. So it's a sort of I'm trying to find the right expression for it. It's something that it's too parallel. It's a circle that seems to be that it seems that they will be unable to square, because the people so the people who can make a lot of noise politically, the people at the higher end of the scale, they are the people who paradoxically do not want to be outcompeted by migrants, as it were. Well, to use the expression that I prefer to use, by experts. So take you. Back in Nigeria, you used to be an advertising executive. Now you've come here and you become a politician, but that's another discussion entirely. Now, imagine if you are here and you're a brand executive, and then you begin to compete with and outcompete someone in um, some advertising agency. And then he decides that, oh, the issue is this immigrant has come to take my job. You're a highly skilled person. they would say that somebody would claim that because you came, a British person lost his job.
I'll give you, sorry, just on
Yeah, go on, go
that.
on.
In my job search in the first year of my being in the UK, it was those conversations were had, but they were more subtle as they often are. Well, we love you have such a good experience. We love all the work you've done, but you just don't have UK experience. And there I was sat thinking, well, I thought ideas were universal. I thought what you wanted from a creative person, especially in advertising, was one, an ability to interpret a brief, two, an understanding of the market and the audience, and three, an ability to then merge your understanding of this brief, your understanding of the target, your understanding of the audience to create a narrative. And then, of course, we can always bring in the cultural nuances, which is why we have people from the insights team to help do that. But it was after a while you start to understand that, well, that idea of you don't have UK experience is just another way of saying would rather someone else.
Yeah. Anyway, the bottom line is, and I think at this point it might be prudent for us to actually talk about the at least point by point the changes
Mm.
so that people listening will understand. Number one, they've increased the skills threshold for skilled worker visas. So and they're going to exclude 111, I think, of the previously 180 eligible occupations from skilled worker visas. They've, of course, we've talked about the fact that they've increased the salary threshold from 38,700 pounds. It's the median income that is 37,500. So they've increased the salary threshold from 38,700 pounds to 41,700
For skilled workers.
for skilled workers. Um, but for PhDs, I think that it's slightly different for PhDs. They're going to shut down the social care and healthcare worker routes. I think that is from this month.
And
So
my
they're going to
my
gradually phase it out.
which is also, sorry, but what's also quite interesting, because if you're shutting down that route, and we know, being a counselor, I know that for councils, about 70% of the budget or the council tax is for adult social care, children's social care, and all that. This is a huge, huge part of need within our communities. And if on one hand, you don't have, as we've said, adequately trained personnel in the country, which is why this government, Kestama's government, is saying what we want to do is train those people who are in here so that they are able to take on these roles. But then you need to remember that training doesn't happen on a 1 or 2 month basis. It takes time. So it's almost counter, in my opinion anyway, it's almost counterintuitive if you're
It
shutting
is
down
counterintuitive.
these routes, but you don't have the people because you need to train them for months. So again, is it politics or
It is politics. I think it's mistaken politics. Again, we've given examples in the first part where this thing always has unintended consequences. And heck, even the recent history of the UK with Brexit should
yeah,
show them very clearly. I think what is lacking, and it's not just a British problem, it's generally a problem around. It's definitely in the entire Western world. It's that lack of political will to be to and somehow that lack of political will translates to an inability to communicate to the population that we need people. So the UK has um, the, the UK's fertility rate is, I think it's so replacement is 2.1 children per woman. The UK is way below that. I think the UK is about 1.4 thereabouts, which means that, and then the UK's median age is, I think, 43, something of the sort. So essentially, what that means is that you have a society that is getting older, more and more people, and then life expectancy is also in the 80s. So the what a lot of people do not understand is that the current social welfare system was designed. I mean, we've talked about this before. It was as a result of the Belvedere reports, and then it was designed in the 1940s. The people who were born in the 1940s, essentially the baby boomer generation, people who were born in the 40s and early 50s, They are now in their the oldest of them is are in their 80s. The youngest of them are in their early 70s. So essentially, they've all retired. You need to take care of these people because they will live longer than their parents. They are all retiring. They're falling off the not contributing to society in terms of taxes and all of that. You need people. It's that simple. One of the things that people in this country do not seem to talk about often enough is how difficult it is for young families to raise kids because of the cost of childcare. You have a situation, and this is something that I've tried to explain to younger people in Nigeria who ask for advice with respect to Japan to live in the country. Now, I'm always like, I mean, things are really rough in Nigeria at the moment. So anybody who says that, I'm no hypocrite. Anybody who says that he wants to move, by all means. But I will always give the caveat. If you have really small kids who are of an age that they need constant parental care, you will be best served by waiting. And I know it gets tough the longer you wait. I mean, think about the fact that the value of the naira has collapsed. So where it would have cost probably 18 million naira to migrate back in 2020, the same amount would be roughly 60 million naira now.
Yeah,
But it hasn't changed in
the
foreign
value.
currency terms.
Yeah.
So those are issues that are real. Um, but at the end of the day, it does not change the fundamental fact that one of the reasons why a lot of people in this part of the world are not having children is the cost of childcare is ridiculous. So you have a population that is shrinking, but it's getting more top heavy in the sense that it has older people who needs to be taken care of
Who live longer.
who live longer. They need to be taken care of. So you really need to get people in. I saw a rather sad documentary a couple of months ago about a town in Italy or a village in Italy that is pretty much shutting down. And you have to take the example of Japan. There are there are whole villages, whole towns in Japan that are now shutting down the schools. And Japan is the poster child of a country that was extremely resistant to migration. Even till now, in the Japanese parliament, they are easing up on migration, but they actively avoid using the word migrants or immigrants. But so the government has understood that, oh, this needs to be done, but because of sentiments,
Of
their
politics.
politics, yeah, so they're avoiding saying the right words
But
or the
it's also quite interesting how, in our bid to satisfy the appetites of politics, as it were, we also we sort of like think in silos. So whilst these rules changes are going up, salary threshold taking up, on the other hand, you also have employers' NI contribution going up as well. So if you're an employer, you're sat there, you're thinking, now, I can either I can pay lower wages, or I can employ these people at this because they're highly skilled, but at this rate, but then I have to pay more. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the stats, around 27% of UK businesses delayed or pause hiring international staff because of course, the costs tied to salary thresholds and national insurance. And you also had um, visa applications dip from to about 12%, by about 12% in Q2 of 2024. Graduate visa applications from Africa fell by 21%, and job offers with sponsorships dipped by 17% in care roles alone. So again, if you look at these roles, let's take the last one, 70% dip in these roles for care roles. Look at the population we're talking about, and something is not adding up. But if you also take the visa applications, the UK gets yearly net about 329 million pounds from visa applications, and this is, because of the visa, the immigration health surcharge, and all that. £329 million net, after you've taken out cost of administration and all that, that will be able to fund 6,500 over 6,500 newly qualified nurses. If you're basing it on about 50K salary average cost per nurse, it will be able to pay for 11,000 new secondary school teachers. Now, this is also, I mean, Labour has said, we want to employ about 6,000 teachers, but these costs, these visa fees alone could employ about 11,000 secondary school teachers and hire about 5,000 new police officers a year. But again, that's not to say let everyone come in, let everyone apply so that we can um you can provide these public services. However,
You're inadvertently touching on the scam of visa fees, but let's not go there.
look, I would love to go there at some point because
At
again,
some point, we'll have to
at
discuss
some
it.
point, because I believe that visa fees are like a line item in the budget.
Yeah, no, they are. I mean, they are a. I mean, the EU, for example, there was recently a report about just how much, I've forgotten the exact amount, but the EU made a killing last year in 2023 on visa refusals.
Hmm.
So the visa fees are a very they're a way of raising money that have been exploited by Western countries for a very long time. This is something that we can't not talk about. We
Yeah.
will talk about it someday. Um, but the again we come back when in reading all the data that you read, we've come back to that point of okay, you talk about employing so X number of nurses for
Hmm.
care homes. There's that fundamental question that still remains unanswered. How much of the native-born population wants to take on such roles? It's a big question
It is.
because it's very clear, and it's same thing with picking the berries in the farms. What percentage of the native-born population want to take on such roles? I would say it's minimal. It's not a very high percentage. So as the population ages, and that is the big irony, as the
Yeah.
population ages and they need more of those people. If we want to keep it a bunch, think of using old people specifically as the crutch. Back where we come from, we really don't have a care home culture. It's older people are taken care of at home by their family. And usually who do we designate? It's one of the young children. Take care of mama, take care of papa. So the young kids, they take it on sort of rotation. So in that respect, I completely understand. At that point, those young kids know that they don't have a choice. This is their grandfather or their great grandfather. This is their great grandmother. This is their grandmother. They don't have much of a choice. So I completely understand the young natives here not wanting to. I'm trying to avoid using the rather vulgar way some of our people express it. So I completely understand the young people not wanting to do those kind of jobs. But those kind of jobs need to be done. But again, it brings us back to that irony of giving the expenses, how expensive. And I think one of the things that a lot of people do not understand is just how expensive legal migration is. So, given how expensive it is, the people that you will get in to a large extent are not those who are going to do those jobs.
Mm.
Therein lies the irony in the whole thing.
Sure.
But one of the things that I would really want to talk, and hey, yes, this podcast is about Africans.
Mhm.
It's about African expats, African immigrants to the UK. But one of the things that kind of saddens me is the closure of the Afghan relocations and assistance policy
Mm.
and Afghan citizens resettlement scheme, because these are people who essentially put themselves at risk for the UK. And of course, we've seen very similar happen in the US. Basically, people who that the Taliban are going to come after them.
Mm.
That is what everything that the media says. that because they worked for the Americans or the British during the Afghan war, that the Taliban will come after them. But yes, you are telling them, oh, we don't want you. It's actually these little messages that these countries send about an incoherent foreign policy. These are among other things, among other actions or non-actions that undermine their standing in the world globally. How will people work for you, put their lives at risk for you, and then you tell them, "Oh, don't come"? How does that work?
Uh, it's not even so much incoherent foreign policy as it is, look, it's what it is. We're going to use you. We're going to dump you. And then it comes to that question of don't hate the player, hate the game. The game is a game. And but it's also not it's not a new thing when you look at history. You know, there's Afghanistan, but there was a pause in the two world wars, Myanmar, Chad, Ethiopia resettlement, all that. You know, there's a history of selling hope, as it were, of co-opting locals to reach or attain a foreign policy goal. And when things go awry, or when those goals have been reached, or maybe just bungled up and leave and say, you know what, everyone to your tent, O Israel. The question therein is, at what point do people then start realizing that there is not going to be any foreign messiah? It's something that in you know in Africa we've still not learned. It's something that is still sadly rampant within our societies, and you also see it. If someone wants to become president in Nigeria, for instance, he's coming to Chatham House to give a speech.
Again, I mean, I'll put it bluntly, since you've mentioned Nigeria. Nigeria is not a nation. It's that simple. And this repeats pretty much across the continent.
Mm,
There are a few countries in Africa that have crossed that threshold to be called nations. Nigeria is not one of them.
mm,
So what you have in Nigeria is different groups, different interests that's working at cross purposes. We haven't defined a national interest.
mm.
So in that respect, it makes perfect sense for the Nigerian political elites to come to Chatham House to do their campaign events. It makes sense because they are not playing for the Nigerian people, whatever that
Well,
is. They are playing for the interest, the business interests that will keep them in power or make them very wealthy when they are in power. That's what they're playing for.
anyway, on I think final thoughts. If there are any, what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts, uh, it's a sorry, it's a very so you would always have this cycle where the government, such as the UK government, will keep changing immigration rules because they want to pander to politics on the extreme right. It's a mistake. What I have said before and now is that no matter how far right you go, the nativist people on the right can't go further. So they will always succeed in dragging you. And if anything, recent and remote history has shown, and not just in the UK, but in so many other countries, is demonizing the migrants never ends well.
Mm.
It doesn't end well for the society. It doesn't, of course, definitely doesn't end well for the migrants. It's just that simple.
Thanks, Chita, for that. My final thought, I would say is, as migrant communities, we do need to start thinking about our involvement in shaping decisions that ultimately affect us. I know a lot of people were very happy to have voted in the last general elections, and that was good. But I also want to say that the elections are are just a first step in ensuring change, whatever change you want. You don't vote and then go. You must continue to engage. Write to your MP, write to your councillors, let them know how any proposed policy will or might affect you, because that is one way we can continue as a collective to put our concerns front and center. So I would encourage people to not lose hope. Yes, the time looks like we should lose hope, but no, don't. Let us continue to engage, because when you hands off, that's when people then say, well, these changes or these proposed changes are taken as read. So please continue to engage.
Following that very inspiring speech, let me put you on the spot. How far what we talked about last week, finding a way to reach out to the Anjorin family?
Yes, trying to do that, reaching out, it's not the easiest thing, but there's a little bit of conversation going on with a few contacts in the background.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
All right.
All
See you
right.
at the next one.
See you at the next one.